Hi, everybody. This is Warren Herman. Tonight, what we are going to do is we're going to explore some further thoughts on the subject of vocational discernment so that we can better understand what to do with our lives. Some of these concepts have been covered in previous videos, but I'm gathering together these concepts in one place. There's about two other videos in this recent little series, and this is because it's very important to have a shift in our understanding of vocational discernment. The problem usually is that vocational discernment becomes a kind of obsessive and confusing thing, and we need to find a way to do this in a free, gentle, peaceful, and loving manner. So I'm going to list a number of different concepts that can be reflected upon and used in order to make this shift, to change our minds about vocation so it can be a response to the love of God which we perceive operating in all things rather than fear. So I'm going to begin by mentioning something that is a concept that I got from the YouTuber Seraphim Hamilton. He's a very interesting fellow. But he made a video about how he was able to have a shift in his certain beliefs because he became more convinced of Christianity. And in the same way, if we can become more convinced of Christ's love for us, we will be much more open to the possibility of making the wrong choice about our vocation. We don't need to be convinced that we made the right choice about our vocation, and the pressure can be removed if we understand how much God loves us. So we must emphasize this conviction of the love of Christ. There were a number of specific ideas that also helped me, recently in relieving this kind of pressure about vocational discernment, and I'd like to list them briefly. The first is that in my early conversion, I had so many different challenges and confusions, including being on an intestine medication that seemed to give me all kinds of mental side effects, that, I was so disoriented, so confused, and so scrupulous, and so many challenges to stay in the faith, that I probably would at least cling to the basics of the faith, even if I pick the wrong vocation. And just as a side note, these type of thoughts, needing this type of thought, that I'll cling to the basics, even if I miss the real plan A for my life that God might have. This is important because there are some teachings, such as those of St. Alphonsus, which seems to put that pressure on us that we must find the right path to get the graces that we need. But we need to understand teachings like that in context. And these points that I'm making in this video are primarily a response to that misinterpretation or that overemphasis on this kind of teaching that leads to an insane pressure in our mind that destroys our ability to even know. It leads to, we need to have a healthy concern for what we do in our lives, but we don't need to have that drive us crazy. We need to hold this in a peaceable way. And so that's why I thought it's so important to realize, okay, I've had so many difficulties in my faith, I probably, even if I pick the wrong path, won't fully throw out Catholicism. Because the challenges already were there, and I could have turned back earlier. So I probably won't, it doesn't mean I'm going to be saved, but it gives a probability, and that's helpful as a reassurance. Also, if I realize, if I spend my time realizing and trusting and letting go, if I let go of concern and trust God, if I let go of concern about my vocation and I trust God as much as possible and love him as much as I can in all things, at all moments, trusting that he's going to take care of me, then it's likely that will naturally kind of counteract any poor choice of vocation. So even if I manage to pick the wrong thing, if I continue to trust and to love, then that will naturally compensate for that. And that will do that. Then there is an interesting principle that can be applied to this type of situation. And this is based on a story. Actually, there's a very interesting story. It's a Hindu story about a wandering ascetic and a robber. And essentially, in the story, God comes down and says, "Hey, do you want to know how many lifetimes you have left?" And the robber says, "Sure." And the ascetic says, "Yeah, okay." And he says to the robber, "You have 500 lifetimes left because you've harmed so many people." And the robber says, "Oh, you are so merciful that that there would even be a way out for me." And on that moment, with that gratitude, he is enlightened and liberated. And God tells the ascetic, "You have only one more lifetime left." He says, "One more. I've been working so hard." He's so angry that he gives up all spiritual practice and goes down to the netherworld. So there is this thing of this gratitude, this kind of back door of gratitude. And we see this in different contexts. Like, so for example, sometimes people who have a very difficult childhood may develop that parental capacity by being merciful toward their parents rather than receiving formation from their parents. In the same way, there's a kind of back door, I believe, to vocation and grace. There's a kind of back door of grace that even if we don't receive the graces of plan A, we could receive them through plan B, through realizing of how merciful God was to us in plan A, and we could get grade A graces through that back door. So we could essentially say there is a back door of grace, of maybe an even greater celebration of God's mercy. Because even though we made a wrong choice, God loves us, and maybe that will make us love God even more. And maybe that will give us even greater chances of salvation. So that's a very interesting idea, having a back door of grace. I think that's a very helpful idea. And it's helpful also just generally to remember that freaking out about what we should do in our lives never helped anyone. And, that's kind of just a general principle. Now, I'd like to also make a few other points. God won't let you get it right if this will let you miss out on the greater good of his merciful love. He won't give you the lesser good of clarity without the greater good of charity. That's a general reason why you may still be permitted to be confused. Another interesting way of dealing with this whole question of vocation is through the concepts of simplicity, complexity, and simplicity and complexity. I don't have a fully developed. This is a thing that I use. This is a kind of framework that is used in other areas. So I wanted to bring it to bear here on vocation, and I may just run it through in a quick way. So simplicity could be the idea that I have to get it right. I definitely am called to this, or I need to get right what my call is. And then there's complexity. Okay, now I have an illness and I can't become a priest or whatever. Whatever it is. There's all these setbacks that we don't know how it really fits together. And then there needs to be a time of simplicity and complexity, where we realize the simple thing is to respond to what God is asking of us in this moment, and that will make the bigger picture vocation take care of itself. So there's kind of this simplicity, which is like, I have to be on the right track, or I'm definitely suited to this track, and the complexity of, oh wow, life is a mess, and then the thing of, oh wait, life is a mess, but every mess is sending me a message, and I need to respond to that message with love. And so that's kind of the different phases of simplicity and complexity as we could apply them to vocation. So we went through three different things there: simplicity, complexity, and simplicity in complexity. And here's another three things. And this is kind of a stolen, this is a rationally stolen thing. Because we want certain things in life. This is kind of stolen from Neil Donald Walsh. This is stolen from a kind of fixated and out of context and improper set of concepts that he had that can be very easily put into the correct tone and the correct way of thinking by being brought into into the light of Catholicism. And it's really like this. You want to realize that that you're never alone, that God is always with you, that Mary's always with you, that you're always in the family of God, the angels and the saints. They're always available to you. You're not alone. The Eucharist is there, the church is there. You're not alone here or in the other dimension. We want to know that we're not alone. And then there's the other element where, and we have to have that belief and that mystical understanding that we're not alone and acknowledge the presence of God to us. And then there's another element, which is, not only knowing that we're not alone and that we are knowing, we have to know that we want to share that love. We want to share that love with others. And that's really encapsulated in the prayer of St. Francis. Make of me a channel of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there's doubt, faith. Despair, hope. Darkness, light. Sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. And so that type of prayer shows us this pathway, not of trying to be needy, but giving to others that which we wish to receive. So that's a very powerful thing. And the other thing is to see the perfection of God's providence in all things. The first truth is very much, this thing of you're not alone. That's very much a noetic truth, meaning the heart, the spiritual heart. You're not alone. The understanding of giving, being a channel of peace, being a channel of love, seeking to console, not to be consoled. This is about the will, in a way, we could say. The idea of the intellect in this is the idea of looking at providence and seeing the perfection of how perfect all the circumstances are to bring about our good and God's glory. And if we keep that attitude, our vocation will proceed naturally from this flow of love. So that's a very important thing. And that brings us to this idea that I've iterated a few times here, which is that our vocation must not be an escape mechanism. It must not be that, I perceive danger, so I'm going to try to get away from something. It has to be, I recognize love and I respond to that. Sorry, my mustache was itchy. So that's how that works. Another important thing is to remember St. Augustine's quote, "Love and do as you will." Because if we love and do as we will, we'll be doing the will of God. There is also a very interesting quote, and I don't think I could pull it up. I'm going to paraphrase it from, and it's a natural version of the spirit of the Catholic process we're talking about here. It's from the popular Hindu teacher Ram Dass. And Ram Dass says, we're always asking, what should we do with our lives? Instead, the real question is how to get quiet enough where the response of what we should do arises naturally from us, basically. That's kind of what he said. But that's very accurate. And that really reflects this idea of seek first the kingdom of heaven and everything will be added to you. That reflects love, and then do as you will. I mean, this is just other ways of saying this. And we could of course, obviously it's incomplete because it would be it really should be something like enter into the quiet and the love of Christ. And then from that, it'll come forth what you should do. Not just enter into the quiet. I'm sorry. The other thing that's interesting is that this idea of receiving love and being in the flow of love is very important because it makes us realize that we respond to love. And this is very interesting to notice that St. Ignatius actually does this in his spiritual exercises. He actually says, we should have a meditation to grow in the love of God And it's very interesting that this is kind of affirmed in this. Here's another idea. Sometimes in our discernment of anything, we teeter on the edge of what we might call splitting. Splitting is when we say, okay, I'm all good or I'm all bad. And the reason why sometimes it's like we just don't want to deal with the complexity of our vocational choice. We want to, and we sometimes like kind of have this like hemming and hawing about things because we reject ourselves if we're not the right category of thing. Oh, I'm good if I'm a religious, I'm bad if I'm not. And so that can make problems. This also can lead to a kind of thing of like where you could like be a kind of bitter against religious life because you couldn't be something. That's kind of a thing that can happen. You kind of always think everybody else is deluded into their vocation. If you had a kind of complex discernment, and this becomes a kind of conflict that comes about because our emphasis is on style and not substance. So, for example, if you are invested in the image or the style of being in religious life, this can make you resentful of those who achieve this status or image. But if you're interested in the substance or practice of religious life, then you remain similar to those who are religious, even if you are not one. So you don't get jealous of them or judge them or have to put them down or anything because you're actually the same kind of thing because you're looking at it from a practice or a substance perspective rather than a style or an image perspective. So it's kind of like if you are really about the jersey or uniform, you are going to kind of resent not being on the team. You're going to say, hey, I don't like that. I don't have the uniform. But if you are really about playing the game, you're going to like those players whether they're wearing jerseys or not, or you're going to like playing the game whether you have a jersey or not. Okay. Another idea kind of related to this jersey type concept or those type of things is sometimes, these things are a protective or compensatory mechanism. So it may compensate for some shame or protect us against some pain. And vocation can be like that. And we don't want that. We want to have a proactive and protective approach, things that protect our dignity and are proactive in meeting our needs. That's what we want. We don't want just things that compensate for shame and, protect us from pain. We want the one that's healthier. That's what we want. And we don't want especially our vocation to become an avoidance addiction so that whenever we are about to be open to loving someone, we think about vocation so we don't have to invest. We don't want that to become what things are. And we have to remember that vocation must proceed. And in other videos, I made videos about the authentic self or the central executive. It has to come out of an authentic anthropology. It has to come out of the context of the proper diagram of the self. I made some videos about forgiveness and also there's one called the tree of the interior life, which talks about like the conscious, the unconscious, and all these different things and kind of links it to more traditional Catholic models of the person. And the thing is that we really need to have a discernment in that context as well, because we don't want to be stuck in our impulses. We don't want to be stuck in our even our apparent inspirations. So that's we need to have it in the right anthropological context. Another idea is that vocation is the mythic call. Vocation is the call into an archetypal life. It's a call into the symbolic world of liturgy and the scriptures. It's a call to recognize the symbolism of our lives, know that we are on stage and that we are living out a mythic, mystical reality, a sacramental world. A completely different idea is that, but maybe it's kind of linked. If we want to think about myths and stories, there's definitely a good story is Star Wars. Star Wars, in order for Luke Skywalker to become a Jedi, Yoda tells him that he must confront Vader. Many of our lives, we have to have mercy upon the rejected shadow aspects of ourselves, the things that we don't want to be, or the things that we try to push away. And if we don't, we may have our vocation might be a vacation. We might be a monk, but actually we're kind of a drunk in a sense, because what we're doing is we're using this to become intoxicated. We're using this to be driven out of to kind of compensate for pains. And so we need to have mercy upon the person we don't want to be. Say, oh, I don't want to be a layman. I don't want to be this and that. I don't want, especially some people have an idea. They say, okay, I'll never be like my father, meaning they'll never be able to be manly. They'll never be able to succeed. Or I'll never be like my father, meaning I don't want to be, whatever negative quality they don't want to be. So it's really that sense that we really need to purify these things, because vocation can come out of these places, these negative places where the wounds that make us feel like we either can't achieve or don't want to have masculinity or femininity in our lives. These things lead to compensatory behaviors, and sometimes our vocation can be an obsessive compensation for these wounds, or at least can be corrupted by an obsessive compensation. So we really have to understand that shame is a big deal. Pain is a big deal. Wanting to have a more comfortable life, wanting to be safe is a big deal. These can be roots of vocational thoughts that may make them into, but they may just be a preoccupation, not a vocation. So those are some different things. And we have to make sure that our vocation is not just a desire to be the opposite of a lay parent. So it's hard. Another thing to do, and I've mentioned this a little bit before, is to realize that vocation can be a protective part that keeps us from investing and getting hurt. It's almost like it's like a dissociative part in internal family systems. It can even be like a suicidal part, saying, okay, it's like, oh, we want to end our life because we don't want to suffer. It can come out in like a self-sabotage. It can come out against the feared self of being, maybe it's being rejected, maybe being disappointed, maybe even being a feared thing, like being a father or being hurt by women and children, whatever it is. It can be a defense mechanism, a part of ourselves that seems to self-sabotage, but really is trying to protect. That was different. I flipped my screen. Oops. So let's keep going. I did not intend to flip the screen backwards. I think, however, one of the most foundational elements of this is that we want to understand vocation as being founded on a proper understanding of hope. If we do not have an understanding of hope and a security in the love of God, if we don't have essentially faith, hope, and charity, vocation will not come about properly. Especially if we have become disappointed by life, we may see vocation as an escape route from the disappointing things of lay life. So we have to have this proper understanding of hope so that we don't build everything on disappointment. But the thing is, sometimes we feel like we're trying to convince ourselves to embrace a naive optimism, which is not going to get us very far, because we realize eventually in our lives that things are not going to work out for us. And that's true. But all things work together for good for those who love God. And that gives us a sober hope here. And we also realize that all things will work out in the life of the age to come. A true hope that spans that, a true and sober hope that says all things work together for good for those who love God here. And God will make all things work out for those who love him hereafter. So that is the essence of a sober hope rather than naive optimism that says, yeah, if I work hard, it's all going to work out for me. It's not going to work out for us. But we have to have that sober hope. And I mentioned before, it's very important to realize, to reiterate, that there's a front door to vocation and the graces of life and a back door. We mentioned that before about, when it's a fatherhood to being a parent, we could get that by, emulating a positive father or by forgiving a negative father. And in a way we could have, we could follow God's plan A and express his mercy, or have mercy on ourselves and accepting God's mercy for not following his plan and get the grace that way. So there's two doors to grace. And there's different dangers of each door in a way. It's almost like one way you could kind of have the danger of, oh yeah, I did what God wanted me to do, so I'm cool, And the other way is the other danger is not doing the thing God wanted you to do, but being humble and receiving the grace. So there's benefits and drawbacks. It's very similar to the parable of the prodigal son, where the older son stays home, maybe follows his vocation and does everything right, but doesn't realize his father loves him because of that. And the younger brother goes off and does the wrong thing, but then comes back and receives his father's mercy. And so in a way, I'm not saying that we should try to not follow our vocation, but we need to really have that trust in God's mercy. Another thing we want to remember is that we may not know what our vocation is, but we can trust that God will take care of it. It's okay to have in practical matters an uncertainty if we have certainty in spiritual matters. And that's kind of what's going on. Another thing here is, why are we obsessed about our discernment? The reason why we still think about it is because we haven't fully abandoned our needs to God. And we feel that we might be abandoned by Him if we get it wrong. So it's all an abandonment issue, if in a positive way and in a negative way. It's just we have to make sure, if you're disturbed about vocation, two things are happening. You think about it because you have not abandoned your needs into the hands of God, and you feel that God may abandon you. If you remove those two things, if you know that God is with you and you trust Him, then the problem is gone. The foundations and root of the problem goes. So that's something there. Another idea is the idea that the discernment that comes from the id is related to the sense of being trapped or being kind of infatuated. So either out of fear or infatuation, we go toward what we want. And if we have rumination rather than infatuation, that's more the superego type discernment. So ruminations, obsessions, trying to figure things out, trying to analyze things, that's the superego type thing. And infatuation and fleeing are the id type thing. So that's the thing there. So I'm looking at some different things here. Yeah, we could say that we want to say some of these things are kind of repetitious here. So I'm going to move on in my little list that I'm reading from. And, I'm just looking here. Here's the thing. We also need, this is like maybe a final thought that we'll close on this. We need to try to do this. We need to trust Christ. We need to abandon ourselves into the hands of God to meet our needs, to have the vocation that we should have, and to fulfill it, to be successful in it, and to fulfill it. And so that is, that's an important thing. So we want to put our needs and everything into the hands of God. But we also need to trust that Christ will make we have to put into the hands of Christ also that He'll make up for our failures if we pick the wrong vocation by mistake, and that He'll care for all our needs. So we have to really give it all to God, because the thing is, we may be wondering, okay, how will I do this the correct way? And we need to be able to trust Christ to make up for it if we get it wrong. And if we do that, that's another one of those ideas, like the ones I mentioned early on, such as, realizing that I probably won't fully abandon everything because it was so difficult at the beginning. Or If I try to make my discernment a response of love, I'll be loving anyway, and that'll help me go to heaven. Or the idea of the back door of saying, okay, if I miss out on the first, if I miss out on doing God's plan A, I can receive His mercy by thinking how great He is to forgive me and let me do plan B. So like those ideas that we also can add to those, the fourth, which is Christ can make up for any failures we have to pick the wrong vocation. So I hope these ideas are helpful, and I'm documenting them especially so that I can remember them, so they don't escape me and I don't get confused again. So at that note, and now that I'm tired, I will leave that video here, and hopefully these are helpful.